Hello YouTube, and welcome to a new Unity 3 land tutorial. So what we're going to do in this tutorial is carry on with our equipment screen, but we're also going to make it 10 times easier to do. So, if you go to your equipment, open up your equipment screen, which is on your GUI scripts. Equipment, you'll need your inventory GUI, inventory add GUI, and collisions. Open all them up because there's quite a lot to open. And then you should have all these up here. So, at the moment on our player equipment, we've got it. So when we equip something, it adds it to our equipment, we can see it, perfect. But what we now want to do is when we click it, it sends it back to the inventory. Now this is really easy to do, but it can also be a bit iffy if you're not in the right place. And the reason it can be iffy is if we go to our collisions, we know this works 100%. You collect it, it shows the right item in the inventory. It goes, adding item, new item, false, so is it a weapon, yes or no? So if you look for sword, it's yes, and then it puts the ID of it. That's all good, but on our player equipment, we haven't got a clue what sword it'll be there. We don't know what ID it'll be transporting across, so we need to somehow give it that ID. So the easiest way to do this is to add it to every class you've got. It can be a bit tedious, but it's also very helpful, and you'll see. So up here, if we type var equip ID, will be an int. So ID is the ID of this. So say we attach a wooden sword to it, the equip ID will be 0. Say we attach an axe to it, it'll be 1. And you'll see why later. So we'll type ID int here, and same again here, equip ID equals int ID. If you haven't seen this class before, copy it now or go back. It's really simple, and I've done it loads of times. So we've got that. Great, so now we can begin returning it, kind of. So we'll go down here and we'll type function return item, in fact equipment, return equipment, and we'll put bracket, that's it. So, we've got it. We definitely know this is going to be a weapon, we all know that. So up here we'll type is weapon boolean. So up here we'll type return equipment true. So these are definitely weapons. And you may be thinking, well, we've only got 2, why do we need to put return equipment? Well, we need to put it because we can now use, if we keep this as a separate function, all it requires is turning that to false, and then you can return armor as well. So it makes it really easy. So return equipment false, right. So now what we need to do is basically say, add it to our inventory. So if we go back to collisions, you can see here, adding it is very simple. We just copy that, paste it in. That'll work, but not fully. So instead of true, we'll put is weapon, just like that. And then now we've got the ID of it, but we don't know the ID yet, or do we? So if we go back here and type equipment details, and then we put bracket, which equipment details do we go for? We don't know yet. So again, up here we'll make a new parameter, ID int, and up here we can now put, well, this grid is 8. Because it's right there. This grid is 9. So when we come down here and type ID, it'll go equipment details all the way up here, and it'll go ID 9, which is, or 8, which is the weapon, and then we get the equip ID. Equip ID. So it'll return the correct ID of it, and if it's a weapon or not. Perfect. But we're never actually giving it an ID in the first place. So then that leads us back to our inventory GUI, because that's the one that transports it to the player equipment. So again, create a class thing, so var, we'll put grid ID for this one, int, here we'll put ID int, same again here, grid ID equals ID, there. So that's now got a grid to hold. So if we go down to the equipment screen, add to equipment, we can easily add it. So duplicate it, equipment, details ID dot, we called it equip ID equals grid ID. So now the inventory GUI will add equipment ID to it. Perfect. Make sure you clear it in your grid because we need to. So grid ID will equal to 0. So we've cleared it and it's added it. But where do we actually get it from the inventory GUI? So imagine it as a tree, player equipment's at the top, it gets all its details from inventory GUI, inventory GUI gets all its details from inventory add item, so we need to add it there. But I've just thought we never added the script to this. So scroll up and make sure you add the script to it, else you'll have a hard time working. So that just declares the script. So inventory GUI, well, add item I mean, that's the one which says basically give it all the details. So this is the big control. So we need to find it, and we need to find where that ID is stored. So if you remember when we called new item, it stores the ID for us. Brilliant, it does it. So we pick up a sword, it uses its ID. So it works. So we've got our ID right there. Or what the case is storing that ID. So right here, if it equals a weapon, we duplicate it. Instead of name on the inventory grids, it's called grid ID equals ID. So there, it'll store the ID for us. Perfect. Come down here, we do it again. Store the grid for us because it's for weapon as well. The IDs, don't matter where it is, does it? So now that should be foolproof, should store our IDs and everything. And then when we click the button, right here, it'll return it back to our inventory. Only issue is we haven't cleared that grid yet, so nothing will happen. We can quickly do that now. Go back to inventory GUI, copy the clear grid, paste it in here. Paste it in here. Clear grid. And the reason it's not going to clear the grid is basically when we take it from there, all we're doing is transporting details. We're never saying it's not there anymore, so you've got to tell it logically if you remember programming. So clear grid, we don't have a player amount no more, so what we're going to say is every time we click it, it's going to do it anyway. There's no choice whether it does it because we're only going to have one item in each grid. So instead of grids.grid value, it's equipment details. There. Equipment details, and now what ID do we use? Well, we need to find a way to get which grid we've changed. ID's another good one, because that works. So let's add it, so ID int. And then in here, we put ID. I apologise for that annoying ice cream man, it does it every time I'm recording. But anyway, so that will transport the ID from here to here, to here, to here. So we transport the ID, and all we do is type ID every time. But just remember what you have and haven't got, because this one doesn't actually have any of these. But it has the grid ID, we know that. It has the icon and description. It has all those, so make sure you put those where they are. We'll keep that as true just for now, it doesn't really matter. But that's it. So we try that, we should be able to pick it up, add it to our inventory and take it away. Hopefully. So first, we'll go and collect something. We have an error. Grid ID is not a member of equipment, 79. So 79, player equipment, so we click it, 79, boom. Well, that's obvious, it's called equip ID. Silly mistake. So this one, equipment details, go up here to this class. Play. Blank icon, player equipment. We never set the blank icon on. We're basically saying fill it in with a blank grid, otherwise don't do anything. We need a blank grid, it's pretty obvious. var blank icon texture 2D. Then we assign it, adding new item, that's character, and blank icon is grid icon. So we play it. So we're going to collect a sword, and then we'll have a look at inventory, see if it's stored the ID. So go to character, inventory GUI, grids, grid ID. So let's collect something. We'll collect the sword. So grid ID is 0. That's pretty obvious, but yeah. So click nuclear box. So 5. So the grid ID is working on that one. So we press O, and you can see we've got blank icons. We can't do anything. Can't do anything yet. So we press I, and we go back to this. We see a sword, so we click it, and we click equip left. So it's completely got rid of it out there, and we cross that off, go to our O, and you can see it's added it. Go back to our GUI scripts, as it added it to the ID. There, it has added it, wood sword. I equipment 0. So we click it, and it should disappear. So it's gone. Go back to inventory, we have it again. Perfect. So we go back to here, look, it's empty. Go back to our character, and it has successfully added it back. So quite a long, confusing process, but when I show you my version of it, you'll be like, oh, that's so much easier. Really, thank you for watching. It means a lot to me. Any problems, comment below. I will try to comment as well time. Comment on Facebook group if you want instant reply, otherwise you might have to wait a bit on YouTube. See you next time.